Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to add my thoughts to an excellent opinion piece in the Financial Times about why the Conservatives, clearly the most successful political party in history in the world, are getting things so badly wrong right now. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So John Murdoch, one of the data analysts at the FT, don't think he's any relation, by the way, wrote a very interesting article on the conundrum of the Conservative Party right now. He noted that it's simply the most successful political party anywhere. Absolutely, of course it is. He noted that it's been in power for 64% of the last 100 years, a feat equalled only by the Liberals in Canada. Absolutely true, of course. Winning, though, is not just about your acumen. It is helped enormously if you have a main opposition which keeps losing focus, as I would argue the UK Labour Party does at least 64% of the time. But there is no doubt that the Conservatives historically know how to win elections. In fact, the last 100 years is like, barely half of their history. People will argue that they have the deck stacked in their favour. Yes, but they stacked the deck in their favour. It is undeniable that they are generally very good at winning. All the more remarkable in the UK because polling consistently shows that the general public are actually slightly left-leaning in their attitudes, which is why Conservatives can never be completely honest about their policies. That a right-wing party can keep winning so consistently is truly remarkable. But what is arguably even more remarkable is that this party has, in the past few years, seemingly completely forgotten how to win. It's either that or they no longer care about winning. But I don't believe that. If Conservatives really were happy to just go into opposition now, they would trigger the election this autumn and put themselves out of their misery. But they do want to win. Some even believe they still can win. But what none of them seem to know is how to win. They're just hoping something turns up. Rishi Sunak gets quite angry, apparently, at the lack of response in the polls because he thinks he's doing the same as previous winning leaders have done. He might even think he's doing them better. He's upset that his so-called efforts are not yielding results. But this is because he is misidentifying what allowed his predecessors to win. The author of this article made some very good points, but one particular good point was about wedge issues. Now, the Tories are currently pushing culture wars in the belief it can distinguish themselves from Labour, and indeed it can, but will it earn them votes? So the author here is saying, well, for a wedge issue to work, there has to be two elements. The first is it has to be seen as one of the most important issues facing the country. The second is that voters must see their party pushing that issue as having the solution. Now, I have alluded to these elements frequently during the culture wars. For example, I have noted that trans issues, they're not what people think about when deciding their general election vote. Lots of people have an opinion on it. Absolutely, you can divide the public on it. But when they're deciding how to use a general election vote, it's not really featuring their thinking. So it doesn't work as a wedge issue. Or asylum. Take asylum. Even for those voters who do think it's important enough to change their vote, they are unlikely to see the Tories as offering the solution. After all, the Tories are in power now. If they have the solution, why don't they apply it? Why aren't the solutions that they are applying working if they have the answers? I've said so many times, these voters are likely to either vote Reform UK as having the nice sounding ideas which haven't actually been proven to fail because they're never in a position of power, or they'll vote for Labour as the credible alternative where they will at least get a competent solution even if it isn't the one they favour. Why would they vote for the party of proven failure? So I absolutely agree with this assessment of a good wedge issue. It's vital that the Conservatives find one to pursue as part of their election strategy if they have any intention of winning. But it's way easier to pursue in opposition than government. Because in opposition, the voters judge you on how plausible your ideas sound. For example, one of the major points which came out of the post-election polling debrief from 2019 was that voters approved of Labour's manifesto. They didn't go, oh, we don't like that, we don't like that. No, they liked it. But they didn't believe it would be delivered. They thought it was too much. You can't do all this. In other words, they didn't think it was plausible. But in government, voters are also judging you on your record. After all, you're in power now. Why would voters believe that you've got the answers to the various problems if you haven't actually solved any problems whilst you've been in power? Where Sunak's getting his strategy fundamentally wrong is he's using the rhetoric of a party in opposition while he's in government. But he's in government. His government does have a long record of failure, but that doesn't mean he had no chance for the next election. If he could have identified a unifying Wedge issue, absolutely he would have had a chance. But he's not observing the wisdom posed by Mr. Byrne Murdoch here. He is not subjecting the various policy areas to the twin tests. He needs to find something that people think is important and that people think a Conservative policy would be better at solving than a Labour policy. I almost thought, for a second, that he had some notion of how to win the election when he was going to come out with his 5 pledges. Then you listen to them. The pledges were, of course, ridiculous. But the idea was there. He needed to show that he could deliver. Like I said, voters will not believe his future plans are plausible if he cannot show that he has been able to successfully implement plans. Because I feared for a long time with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister that what the Tories will do is wait for about 6 months before they intend to go to the polls, drop Boris Johnson, then get someone plausible in, 6 months later go to the polls when they haven't had enough time to prove delivery. But they didn't do that. Sunak, by the time the election rolls around, will have had enough time to have at least solved some problems. So he had to show that. He had to show he could do that. He needed to be able to say to voters, I achieved these things. I had limited time, but I got things done. Give me more time and I'll get more done. As an election pitch, after what will be 14 years of Tory disaster, that could still have worked. That was plausible. When inflation does fall to half of what it was last year, if indeed it does happen this year, but it is still likely, there will absolutely be voters who go, oh, he said he'd reduce inflation by half and he has done. Well done there. And they will believe it's because of what Sunak did, even though he didn't do anything. But that on its own isn't enough. Apart from anything else, there's too many voters who think that reducing inflation actually means deflation. They think prices should come down. But he needed more anyway. The other pledges he chose all needed positive government action to achieve. The inflation was always going to fall naturally. He needed others, he needed to do something to get the others down. He can't bring the national debt down while he includes large levels of borrowing in the budgets. He can't grow the economy while he's making it harder for businesses to attract both workers and customers, as well as increasing their operating costs. He can't bring down waiting lists whilst chasing medics out of the NHS. He can't stop the boats by making dangerous channel crossings the only way to claim asylum in the UK. So his 5 pledges were the right idea, but with a spectacularly, magnificently wrong application. He needed pledges that would be achieved. They either needed to be things that would happen naturally, as is still likely to be the case with inflation, or things which would happen as a result of his policies. Like, if he'd have promised that corporate profits would be increasing, he'd have been a shoo-in. Except, of course, that is not a top issue for voters, so it doesn't work. The bottom line is that the key issues for voters are the economy and healthcare. Now, in selecting their wedge issues, the Tories had 2 choices. First, pick an issue that is already considered of top importance to voters and work out a way to start delivering. So, economy or healthcare. Second, pick a completely different issue, which is what they did, and persuade voters to consider it of top importance. Now, this worked for Brexit, for example. They got that to work with Brexit. And so Sunak has tried it again with asylum, but it's not working. Their focus has raised the issue higher than it normally would be, but not high enough. And the problem is the cost of living crisis now is so severe that you're not going to displace that as the top issue without something, with something like ideological. It worked in 2015, 2016, even 2019. People's standard of living was going down, sure, but most target voters were still doing all right. And they believed the Tories when they said they had a way to make things better. Now things are really bad, and what sane person is going to look at the last 13 years and believe that the Tories have the answer when all of their promises have turned to shit? Finally, Byrne Murdoch makes a final very interesting point. He brings Labour into the mix. He says that because the Tories are not pushing a credible wedge issue, that Labour don't really feel the need to respond, and that is to their advantage. If the Tories could identify something to get voters on board with, Labour would have to come up with a counter position to take them on. Now, the problem with taking a position on any policy area, like controversial policy area, is that you will please those who agree, but annoy those who don't. And for a lot of policy areas, it's actually quite hard to find a position that the majority will agree with. So you actually, no matter what position you take, annoy more people than you please. In other words, you divide your potential support. So whenever people bemoan Labour for seemingly not taking a strong line on certain issues, it's strategic. Every position they state divides their voters. And if the general outcome of their position doesn't, the detailed method will. We've seen it whenever Labour have adopted a position. You get people saying, will Labour get off the fence and adopt a position? No, not that position. So the Tories failing to identify a credible wedge issue works against them in two ways. First, it's not uniting voters behind their banner. Second, it means Labour can avoid dividing their potential support too much. They can be a bit ambiguous on certain policies. They have policies, and with some of them, there's detail on them. But with some of the more controversial ones, it's a little bit more ambiguous as to exactly how they'll achieve it. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.